Before the break, we showed you how the Republican Party has done a complete 180 since the Capitol Hill riot. At first, you may remember leadership denouncing President Trump right from the floor of the Senate and House. But now they have a case of collective amnesia. We also spoke about a congresswoman who supports QAnon and has long paper trail here of saying really dangerous and unspeakable things. And somehow she's actually gotten rewarded by the GOP with a key committee post. I want to bring in my guest now. He's perfect to discuss this issue. Stuart Stevens, part of the Lincoln Project, the group of big-name Republican campaign veterans that formed last year with one goal: to help defeat Donald Trump. Mission accomplished. Stevens, he's been a top strategist for 5 GOP presidential campaigns, including having a major role in Mitt Romney's. Now he's also the author of It Was All a Lie: How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump. And Stuart, your book came out last year before the election, and this is, maybe it's a bad analogy, but almost like stages of cancer, in that you wouldn't have believed, I would think, just how insane some of the closing arguments of Trump would have been, that he was being cheated, that this was a grand fraud. Then we saw the insanity after the election, where he only increased the rhetoric and tried to literally engineer a coup. And then we saw the events of January 6th. But to me, almost as inexplicable is, I see McConnell and McCarthy condemn the president, and then I see what's happened in the last 24 to 48 hours, where McCarthy's now kissing the ring of Trump, and they're promoting the loons of the loons, and almost sending threatening notes to Republicans who voted their conscience against Trump. Where is the bottom here?
Listen, I think your analysis is sadly dead on. I wrote a pretty bleak book about the Republican Party. I finished, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. As it turns out, I was wildly optimistic. I worked for decades in the Republican Party, electing a lot of people at the highest levels, helping elect them. And I still find myself very naive. I mean, if you asked me on the 2nd of November, if Donald Trump loses by north of 300 votes, 7-8 million were Republican senators and elected congressmen and women accept that, I would have said, of course they're going to accept it. They won't like it, but they'll accept it. Well, I was wrong. If you'd asked me on January 5th, is the United States Capitol going to be invaded the next day, I would have said no. I think that the party is in a terrible downward spiral. I think the best comparison is to look at other groups that have become extremist groups.
Stuart, I'm trying to, for the moment, let's separate all morality or even what's right or important for a democracy, just pure, raw politics. Mitch McConnell may be a lot of things, but the man can count, and he's, sometimes, I said yesterday, he's playing chess when some of the Democratic leadership may be playing checkers. He hates Trump, always has, and he was given an opportunity to cut him off at the knees after January 6th. My God, even McCarthy, not exactly the king of conviction here, he condemned him on the floor of the House. They had their chance on a platter. They could make sure he couldn't run again in 4 years or hold over their heads, that he'll start some fakakta party, third party. And yet they backed off. I don't get why. Only just looking at it under the veil of self-interest. They had more courageous guys like your old boss, Mitt Romney, do a lot of legwork for him and condemn him. Why didn't they follow to get their party back?
Look, I think people are going to be asking that question in decades to come when they study this era. I think it's a profound question, and exactly the right question. If you look at January 5th and 6th, Mitch McConnell had the worst 24 hours that a majority leader's probably ever had in the history of the country. He went to bed majority leader, woke up minority leader, and then his own office was invaded by members of his own party. I mean, that's a bad day. And still they won't do it. I think it's just a classic mistake, political mistake. We have this idea that sometimes there's some grand scheme at work here. I would say the other alternative is they don't know what to do, so they're doing what's easy.
There are a couple other metrics, and one that you guys at the Lincoln Project really focused on, which is corporate donors. All of a sudden, when the mother's milk starts getting cut off from people with deep pockets, we've even seen this on Fox News in prime time, all of a sudden people find religion. The second thing is, and this hasn't gotten a lot of play, but I'm sure you've seen it, since the election, 30,000 Republicans have changed their party's registration. In Pennsylvania alone, 10,000 after they've seen what has happened in their state house. There's got to be a tipping point where Republicans say, wait a minute, I don't want to, have to wait till the next generation to ever win nationally again here. This is crazy. And I know you've talked about Arizona, for example. It could become California if you follow the trend lines where all of a sudden, changing demographics, but also where people look around and they say, wait a minute, I don't want to be this. There's a danger here for Republicans that they can't wait for the Trump fever to burn. They got to act sooner than later. Do you think leadership knows that?
I think that there is a divide between what they know. I mean, as you said at the top, they all know that Donald Trump is a disaster. They've known this since 2015, and yet here we are. The Republican Party is a Donald Trump party. I mean, look at the platform. And you had to be inside Republican politics to appreciate how vicious the fights were over the platform. And now they didn't really have a platform except be whatever Trump is for. It's like a Fuhrer oath. It may take longer than we think, but I think it's only going to be through sheer fear of defeat and losing races that they should have won, like in Georgia, that'll make the party change.
And this all brings us to where we started with our setup, which is with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I know she's a symptom, but she's a pretty bad one. And I just asked Stuart, listen, Steve King said some awful stuff over the years, but they cut him from committees, and he ended up losing in a primary because he was basically, excommunicated from the party for all intents and purposes. They gave this woman a promotion and put her on the education committee, and I asked that in the context of McCarthy telling everybody in a conference call, cut the crap, let's all stay, let's not have GOP on GOP crime here. But that same night, you've got Matt Gaetz, another rocket scientist, going to Wyoming to do a fundraiser for a primary opponent to Liz Cheney, who, by the way, is in Republican leadership. And now we see what's going on with Greene. And all in the backdrop of the FBI giving escalated domestic terror warnings. God forbid something happens. There's going to be questions that have to be answered. But again, I still don't get the calculations of, in this case, McCarthy. He's got to know that he doesn't want her to be the poster child of the GOP.
Look, I think these are weak people. A guy like McCarthy is sort of like a Rush chairman. I don't think he has any great political skills. Certainly doesn't have any great strategic skills. I don't really think they know what they're doing. I think they're just trying to get through day to day. But we hear a lot of talk about a civil war inside the Republican Party. I'd like to say that's the case, but really I don't see that. I mean, I love Liz Cheney. I think she's really the voice of conservatives now. She's principled. She's shown what courage is. But is she more the future of the Republican Party or Marjorie Taylor? I can't argue it's for Liz Cheney. I think the Republican Party is what the Republican Party wants to be now. And we just have to accept that and quit asking ourselves, there must be some mistake here. They're going to come to their senses. I don't think so.
Yeah. And, I think even 4 years ago, if somebody said, well, this could be the consequence, even if you had the worst, precepts of what Trump could be, maybe. But I never thought the Republican Party, at least the one that I knew, could have been so co-opted so quickly and so basically abandoning of all the principles that I always grew up, the Reagan Republicans. It is unrecognizable anymore. But Stuart, I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And up next, we show you how we, the people, feel about things like the COVID vaccine, immigration, and President Biden. The latest poll numbers. We'll have those after the break.